Hello, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja here, doing a debrief with somebody who's actually, I think, maybe better at verbal than I am. This is Colton. Recently took the GMAT exam, got a 780, and he got a perfect score in the verbal section. Did it all with free resources, 2 months of studying, totally free. Didn't spend a dime other than on the exam itself. So here to hear more about his story. Thank you so much for joining us, Colton.
Yep, pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much for doing this. Anybody watching this live, please punch in your questions. I'm going to ask Colton some kind of general questions, get him talking about his life, kind of the basics of kind of what he did for the GMAT, why he's inflicted this on himself. And meanwhile, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So ask your questions and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So Colton, just tell me a little bit about kind of where you are in life and tell me about school and kind of what your plans are and why did you do this GMAT thing to yourself?
For sure. So I'm studying at the University of Alabama right now. I'm a senior doing mechanical engineering, doing business minor, math minor, a little bit of everything. And I want to go into management consulting. So hopefully an MBA sometime down the road. And I just thought a GMAT, a good score on that would really help me as far as any of those goals in the future go.
Awesome. And so tell me about kind of when you first started studying. I assume that was earlier this summer, so not during the school session. Tell me what that was like for you. Kind of what was the first thing you did? Tell me about kind of that experience of having your first practice test score.
Right. First thing I did was just take a diagnostic. I think that's pretty standard. I just wanted to know where I was at, and getting the 650 back, it was a little bit disheartening like at the start because I scored pretty well in the ACT. I usually do really good on standardized tests. So seeing like a subpar score on that, I knew I had a lot of work ahead.
And what was the breakdown of that 650 initially?
Verbal was 37, and then quant was, I don't know the score. I know it was like under 50th percentile, which that was another big hit because I'm come from an engineering background. I thought quant would be really good. So seeing that percentile discrepancy, just a lot of work I had to do.
And I'm guessing you were in the low 40s, just if you got a 650, 37 verbal, probably something like a 43 quant. Right. And what was, so as soon as you saw that score, so obviously you were disappointed, especially with kind of a strong quant background in particular as an engineering guy, math minor. What was your first move from there? Like, did you have a feeling, did you have a sense of what went wrong? Was there a whole bunch of kind of digging into the test to see what happened? Or did you kind of know right off the bat what went wrong for you?
Exactly that, the latter. As an engineer would, I took the test and I broke it apart as much as I could. So I'm not going to go over that. I think everyone here kind of knows the breakdown. But the key thing I learned, I looked up the scoring grid for the GMAT, and I saw that if you get a perfect verbal score and a 50th percentile score in quant, puts you right at 740. But if you flip those around, if you get 50th percentile in verbal and a perfect quant score, you're sitting at like 640. So I saw that verbal was weighted much heavier. And then, like, in addition to that, verbal, there's only 3 sections in it. So I was like, okay, my goal now is to perfect the verbal section as much as I can. Those 3 areas, reading, comp, critical reasoning, sentence correction, and just drill those. So I think, like I said in the debrief, about 80 to 90% of my time was spent on verbal. And that's kind of the reasoning behind it, is because how heavily weighted that section is.
And when you took that first diagnostic, did it feel hard to you? So when you saw that 650 pop up on the screen, were you surprised at all, or did you kind of have that sinking feeling during the test that you were struggling with timing, or that it was harder than you expected it to be?
Not really. I think the GMAT's, it's kind of misleading when you take it, because sometimes you can do really good and ace all the easy questions and be like, wow, I did really good. And then flip side, you can get a bunch of hard questions, get them all wrong, but that means you're doing good. So I think I was the former on that first test, and I kind of got a lot of easy questions right. And that's where I ended up. So it didn't feel too hard.
And then as you reviewed your errors, did you feel like there were a lot of questions that you knew how to do that you missed? Or were you just kind of looking at them going, oh, wow, I just don't know how to do these?
There was a lot of stuff I didn't know how to do. I was unfamiliar with sentence correction. Like I scored well in ACT, like English and grammar, but the GMAT, it's has a lot of nuances that it tests. So I had to learn all those tricks for sentence correction.
Cool. So let's get to the thing that a bunch of people are already asking. So tell us more about the resources. What did you do from there kind of in the following 2 months? And tell us kind of how you got your skills back up to the level you wanted them to be.
For sure. So I'll start with the verbal side. I used Actually, I'll go back one step. So for verbal, what I did, seeing those questions that I got wrong, I was like, I know nothing about this. I knew I had to learn first. So I do what I usually do. I go to YouTube to try to learn stuff. I came across the GMAT Ninja verbal series, where Charles went through questions live and just talked about his thought process behind them. That was really helpful in critical reasoning, reading comp. And then in addition to that, I used the Veritas Prep. They have a fantastic sentence correction series. So that kind of laid my foundation for approaching the questions. And once I got that down, I would go to the GMAT Club forums and just sort by difficulty. I think always like 700 plus, and then just go through, keep the error log, and get questions right or wrong.
And so about how many hours per day were you spending on verbal?
Like 8 or 10.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't, it was about a month there that like I woke up, worked out, ate, showered, and then just did GMAT. And that was my life.
Wow. Okay. So I want to dig more into kind of what that 8 to 10 hours looked like. How much of that was spent kind of in learning stuff, watching YouTube videos, reading theory? How much of it was spent practicing? How much of it was spent kind of analyzing your results?
Well, that like 8 to 10 hours period, that was you said OMG. That's funny. That was later in the timeline. So maybe like the first month I would be learning a lot, but once I had that foundation, it would just be a bunch of practice. So those 8 to 10 hours were straight just practice. And there's something else I wanted to add, which is I did this with a friend a friend studying the LSAT. So LSAT has reading comp and LR, which is similar to GMAT CR. So what we would do, we would get on a call, put like a reading comp passage in the doc, and we just read it together silently. And then once the first question comes up, be like, hey, what'd you get? What'd you get? And we would talk about our answers. And then if we got different answers, what we would do is argue with each other on why the answer is what we think it is. And that trained me like so well to back up my answers through the text. Because if I had to defend my answer against my best friend and say, no, I think it's B because it says right here this, and it's also really helpful if I get it wrong because he says, no, it's C because this line in the text. And I was like, oh, I didn't really see that on the first pass through. So that was a big help. And that was kind of what most of the time was spent. It wasn't just me like burying my head in the computer. We were kind of shooting the breeze, talking to.
Awesome. That's phenomenal. And honestly, I mean, that's a lot of what, I mean, I think kind of in a sense, the principle behind GMAT Club and why we encourage non-experts to participate so much in the forum is the more you have to explain your thinking, it really does something for how deeply you understand it. So that makes total sense. So in kind of that month where you spent 8 to 10 hours a day doing mostly verbal, about how many practice questions were you doing in that time?
I don't know. I think I would spend about maybe 10 minutes on average per question. So that's 6 times 8, like 50 questions, 60 questions a day. The reason I say like 10 minutes per question is because I wouldn't just do a question, get it wrong, and move on to the next one. Like every question that I got either right or wrong, I would always dig a layer deeper and then a layer deeper than that on why did I get this question right or wrong. Because if you get a question right, but you don't know why, it's as good as getting it wrong. It's actually worse because you mislead yourself to thinking, oh, I'm good on whatever topic I got right. But if you don't know exactly why and what topic the GMAT's testing, why you got that right, you're not helping yourself at all. So that's why I spent 10 minutes as opposed to 2 or 3 on each question.
And you're starting to sound like a GMAT tutor there with the sort of, if you don't understand the why, then how much is it really helping you to just do the reps for their own sake?
Right.
So in terms of, so if we call it 50 to 60 questions a day, it sounds like you were doing some of them kind of, alongside your friend, where you're doing kind of one question or one passage at a time. Were you also setting aside time to kind of sit down and crank through full, 25 or 30 question sets? How much was that part of the picture for you during that kind of concentrated month of verbal?
It was a small portion, but it was significant. So a couple times, I don't think I mentioned this yet, I did a lot of LSAT prep. So I would take LSAT, just full length sections. So their reading comp section is 35 minutes. I did them in about 50. And just I sat down and did the whole thing at once. just to get that mental stamina. And I think I did maybe 4 of those in total, and then 4 LR passages as well.
Awesome. And then say a little bit more about kind of the practice materials. You mentioned LSATs, and you mentioned it quite a bit in your debrief as well. And I think anybody who's watched my videos or read our forum posts, I'm a huge fan of using the LSAT for GMAT Prep. But say more about kind of overall, we're using other questions in it. So GMAT official guides, how much official guide stuff were you doing versus LSAT? Were you using any non-official verbal questions? Tell us a little bit more about kind of that overall balance over the couple months of your prep.
For sure. So first, non-official questions, I stayed away from those like as much as I could. They're not good at all. So I took a couple practice verbal sections from various companies, and I scored like -7, -9 on those right after I would score like a near perfect on official GMAT verbals. So it just shows the difference what the GMAT tests versus what these other companies test. And if you're practicing with these other companies, you're going to be learning incorrect material. So you really want to stick to official GMAT. With that being said, I didn't plan too well for the future when I started studying, and I used up a lot of my official guide questions. Like those are gold, so you want to not use them all up at once. So that combined with the fact that I was like shooting for a really high score led me to LSAT materials per Charles' recommendation. And for the LSAT, I'll kind of break it down into 2 things, the LR and then the reading comp. So the LR, it's slightly different than GMAT critical reasoning because it's logical reasoning. So it's very strict, logic-based, and it's good for getting your like fundamental logic skills down. But the critical reasoning is a little broader than just pure logic. Critical reasoning is going to test your brainstorming skills, your creative thinking skills, and how you can apply that to logic in like usually business scenarios, but really anything. So you got to keep that in mind when you're studying LR, that it's not going to be exactly like that on the exam, but it's a really good underlying skill to get good at. So that's what I would use the LR for. Transition into CR as you get closer to your exam. And like I said, just apply those skills. The other half, reading comp, LSAT reading comp passages, they're hard. They're really difficult. They're longer. They have harder questions, and you're expected to do them in shorter times. So those 3 factors combined made it a really helpful study tool. And then transitioning back to GMAT, it feels a lot easier. I think Charles said once, it's like swinging with a weighted bat and then taking the weight off. I swung on those the GMAT passages like that, and it felt really nice. So I would definitely recommend the LSAT passages for reading comp.
Awesome. There's a good question here, and apologies for any mispronunciations of names. Jaideep. So why is the LSAT a good replacement for the GMAT? You just addressed that already. But there's an interesting question there about on the LSAT, at least on the paper-based version of the LSAT, they're transitioning to online as well now. But on the paper-based version of the LSAT, you're allowed to write in your exam booklet. Obviously, on the GMAT, there is no exam booklet. Was that something you picked up on right away, and you were working on a separate piece of paper? Or was there anything you had to adjust when you used the LSATs for GMAT Prep? Was there anything you had to do a little bit differently than you would do for the LSAT, or than your friend was doing who was actually studying for the LSAT?
There was one thing is when I was reading the passage, I don't know if it helps, but I would highlight the words just as I read them. And I think you can do that on the GMAT, or I thought anyway. And so I went to the GMAT, got my first reading comp passage, and I went to just highlight as I read to help me remember. And you can't even do that. You can't even highlight it. So that was a little tough. I had to use the cursor and just kind of move it along, but no difference. I didn't use any aids when studying LSAT. Like I really made sure not to do that because my friend, he'd be highlighting the passage, underlining, writing notes. I said, well, I can't do that on the real test, so I'm not going to practice like that.
Awesome. Getting a bunch of good questions here about reading comprehension. One thing that when I see somebody on the forum that gets a 51 on verbal, I mean, I can't stress enough. I've been teaching this stuff for 20 years. I mean, how incredibly rare that is. If I were to list the 10 best tutors I know in the industry, maybe half of them have ever gotten a 51. I mean, that is, you almost certainly didn't miss any questions, maybe one at most, probably not even that. I mean, it is a really incredibly high bar to hit. So you have to have this level of just baked in reading precision, kind of this just native ability to read something and just understand exactly what the author meant. There's a talent component there. So part of what really drew me to your story, Colton, is you went from a 37 verbal to that 51. And so there's a couple related questions that people watching have asked. One, which I believe was from JDeep as well, was, were you doing any leisure reading? Tell us a little bit about just kind of your reading habits. Are you an avid reader in general? Is that part of what kind of gave you that fundamental ability to score this high?
Yeah, I would love to touch on that actually, because I remember you saying something about you do have like a certain reading ceiling. I have finished about 3 or 4 books in my life. One of those being Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Hunger Games, things like that. In reading classes, I would always look up the Spark Notes and do the bare minimum. So I'd not call myself an avid reader. I don't read for fun ever. I watch YouTube videos. And on that first practice test, actually, I wanna share a screenshot on the forums. But it was like correct for like sentence correction LR. And then reading comp, it was wrong. Back to sentence correction, getting right. So I would get all of these reading comp questions wrong, even on the easiest passages. So the reading comp was a big area that I had to improve on, and just a lot of strategies going into it. Like I said, the doing it with my friend helped a lot, like analyzing the text and finding the answers. I think the special thing about reading comp compared to all the other sections is that the answers are usually right there in the text. There's no conclusions that you really have to come to, like in LR. Sentence correction, you have to know certain rules. Quant, you have to know background knowledge and apply it. But reading comp, for most part, it's there. So it's really an acquired skill to try to be able to find certain things in the passage, piece them together, and then be able to draw from those when you go to answer the question. So that's a big thing I had to learn.
And can you say a little bit more about when you're taking your actual exam, reading comp passage pops up on the screen, what's your approach? Can you kind of walk us through what you're doing, what you're thinking about? Are you taking notes? Just kind of what's your overall process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something I struggled with, and I had to try a bunch of different things, see what worked for me. And you have to do the same. Like there's no magic approach or one thing that'll work for everybody. For me, my approach that I found worked, when I saw the passage, the first thing I would do is get interested in it. That was the biggest thing. Is first I would see a humanities passage. I had one about women in cheese making. I'm sure some of you guys have seen that one. And I was like, what the heck? Like, oh, this is so dumb. But really, like, it helps so much. If you look at the passage, it'd be like, okay, women in cheese making, what can I learn from this? And I thought, like, okay, I'm going to read this. If I was going to explain this to someone right after this in like 15, 20 seconds, I'm going to read this passage, interested in it, with the intent of being able to summarize it and tell someone, okay, women in cheese making is about the Industrial Revolution and how it impacted, like, women's roles in society. That's what I want to find out from the passage. And both of those combined make you a really like focused and kind of avid reader in that paragraph. So that was my approach to them. I didn't do any note taking. I was kind of stressed for time, so I thought that wasn't the best option. Really just like mentally, like a picture. Okay, this part talks about this part talks about this. But I would do a thorough read through the first time. So there's a lot of things out there saying skim, read the first sentence, just any of those strategies. Really, I would sit down, not worry about time the first time, and just read it. And if I missed a sentence, if it didn't make sense, I would go back, read it again. So the initial read throughs is really for like deep understanding. And that allowed me to answer the questions in like 30, 40 seconds once I got that deep understanding.
I'm kind of fascinated by, so again, I can't stress for everybody watching how unusual this is to have somebody who is not a maniacally avid reader score this high in verbal. I mean, that is really unusual. I mean, it says a lot about just kind of, just how fundamentally smart you are, but also that you managed to kind of, you really managed to sort of intuitively catch something about what the exam is really doing. I mean, I think you somehow, in a way that is really hard to, I think, explain succinctly, you developed an intuition and a feel for what exactly it is that you need to do when you see that passage. I guess my question for you is, how do you think you would have gotten as far with that process, especially on reading comp, if you weren't working with your friend, if you didn't have that whole experience of spending all of those hours explaining out loud what was happening, defending your answer, maybe challenging your friend's answer? How much of your success do you think you can attribute to that? And do you think you would have made the same kind of realizations about the test without that?
Not at all. I would attribute almost all of it. That was integral in the whole test taking process and the studying process. And as far as just motivation too, in general, like having someone to go through it with, who's on the same journey as you, being able to call and like just do it together. That was another key part. But to touch on the strategy again, like, yeah, that was, I think the biggest thing was reading the question and having to back up my answer and not just be like, I don't think it's this, I'm going to guess. Like we didn't allow each other to guess on any question because we were both shooting for perfection. So we'd sometimes sit on a question for 10, 15 minutes until we found the right answer. Because it's like, what are you doing if you're just going to guess, get the question wrong, and then, or maybe get it right? Like it doesn't matter. So you need to spend the time, dive deep in the text, and then like find out why you're not getting the right answer too. Not just how to get it, but like why are you not getting the right answer? So that process was key to helping the verbal score.
Awesome. Out of curiosity, how's your friend doing with the LSAT? Is he already taken it, or is he looking ahead to a fall exam?
Taking it. He doesn't have the score back yet, but we'll see. I'll update you.
I'm curious. Ping me when he gets a score, because I'm super curious to hear how he does. We're getting a bunch of questions here also about timing, and I think there's been maybe 3 or 4 of them in the thread so far. I guess the first one that I think is probably the easiest to address: did you use timestamps at all? So, for example, people will say, I'll take that look as a no. But for example, people will kind of write out some numbers in front of them and say, well, after 16 minutes, I need to finish 9 questions. Were you doing anything like that? Or were you thinking systematically about time management in any ways like that?
For sure. I mean, the GMAT, it's a game in the end of the day. So I had to make sure I was following those rules. I know that the verbal section, you have about 2 minutes per question, a little bit less. So periodically I would check the timer and just divide it by 2. And then that's how many questions are, like, that's the question I should be on. And I tried to stay about 2 or 3 minutes ahead of time all the time, just so I had a little bit extra.
Awesome.
And then one more thing I want to add to the timing thing is spending those 10 or 15 minutes on a practice question allowed me to get the answer in 30 to 40 seconds. So it's almost counterintuitive to that extent, but spending a lot of time will help you be more efficient. Don't worry about time if you don't know the answer. Like guessing will never help you unless you're on the exam, but in practice, guessing will never help you.
There's a related question here that I think you've already addressed, but I think it's worth asking again and again, apologies for any mispronunciations, Mariam. I'm just wondering how you understood how to correct questions that you'd get wrong. So how did you know it was wrong about them? And especially when you're in the times when you're working on your own and didn't have your friend there, how is it that you would figure out what went wrong for you?
Mm-hmm. That's the one thing I really appreciate the GMAT Club forums for, is the expert replies and even the community replies on there. They were key in saying like the underlying topics. I'll give an example on quant maybe. It was there was like a cube and a sphere inside, and it said how, like what's the maximum distance from the vertice to the surface of the sphere. And I thought that was like a beautifully constructed question because you don't really need to know a lot, but I got it wrong. So I was like, how am I I don't know this. I don't know any of this. But the expert reply allowed me to see like, oh, there's a formula. I knew the formula. But what was the approach? Like, what was I doing wrong? What was I not breaking down enough to be able to do that? So it's a combination of seeing the formulas, seeing what they're testing, and then really just reps with like how do experts approach these questions. So that was how I did that. I saw one comment that said Charles is God. I thought that was funny.
It is funny and sadly not true. Buñuel, on the other hand, may well be God. Nobody knows for sure. There's an interesting comment here about reading speed. You must have an amazing reading speed, and I would love to hear you talk about that.
I mean, I don't know. I've never measured it, never compared, but I'm not a reader. I don't read for fun at all. I watch YouTube videos for fun. I watch them on like 2 times speed. So maybe that has something to do with it, but I'm not an avid reader at all.
And I think you already mentioned it, but when you were doing the LSAT sections, I think you said that, I mean, obviously your friend is taking the LSAT. He has to do the sections in 35 minutes for 25 questions. What did your times look like?
They're around 50 minutes per I tried to never go above 55. And if I was at like 45-ish or on pace for 45, I'd slow down and take a little bit more time. So I shot for around 50. And then as far as accuracy on those, it's usually like 23 to 25 out of 25. So it's good.
Awesome. Perfect. So we should probably talk about quant a little bit. We've had a couple questions in here. What did you do for quant? How did you improve there? Because it sounds like most of your effort was on verbal. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it paid off really well. But talk a little bit about your process for quant. What worked for you?
Quant, that's definitely an important section. I'm not the expert in quant, so I'll just lend my 2 cents on it. I approach quant a little bit different than verbal, coming from a good quant background and getting like a decent amount of the questions right on my initial diagnostic. I didn't feel the need to like learn a bunch of quant strategies. I had the background in geometry and algebra and all that. So I went straight for practice questions on the GMAT Club forums. And what I did, took quant as a whole section and segmented it out as the GMAT Club has it. There's like geometry, there's algebra, number properties. And what I would do a question, and the same underlying strategy as verbal is like, get it right or wrong, find out what they're testing on a deeper level, and then make sure I know that like inside and out. There's a really good example. Factoring, prime factoring. I never learned that. For some reason, in like high school, junior high, I just skipped that math class, never learned it. So, when I saw one of these questions testing something crazy, like find the number of factors of blah, 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 like with K to the power, I had no idea. I was like, how am I supposed to do that? Looked at the expert reply and I saw he did something called prime factoring, and I've never seen that before. So what I did again, like on a deeper level, I was like, okay, what is prime factoring? And I went to YouTube, Khan Academy, great resource. I looked up like prime factoring basics. Took about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I had a little notebook and I just wrote down like, this is what it is. This is some relevant formulas. And then I would go maybe 3 or 5 more questions testing exactly that, just to make sure I got the fundamentals, and not only the fundamentals, but how to apply those to certain questions that the GMAT tests.
Awesome. So it sounds like you mostly kind of let your practice work from the official guide and from practice tests kind of dictate how you studied the quant. And when you miss something, you'd kind of do a deeper dive into that subject and go, wait, how should, I don't know what I was supposed to do here. Oh, there's a thing called prime factoring. And then let me do a deeper dive into that to understand it at a deep enough level that when I see some crazy variation of it on my next attempt at the exam, I'll know what to do. Is that a fair?
That's perfect. And then just reiterate that process until I wasn't seeing many questions that I haven't seen that underlying factor for.
Awesome.
I saw one question. Should you trust your gut always? You should trust your gut never. You should always be able to support whatever answer you have with the text 100%. And that's touching back on the reading comp thing that I said, like arguing with my friend. Always be able to back it up. You should have no gut instinct in the GMAT.
Awesome. The other question here I really like that just popped up from MK, Krish, how did you keep yourself going with 8 to 10 hours of practice on verbal on a daily basis? How'd you stay motivated?
Yeah, I think there's 2 main factors for that. First is obviously having a friend to do it with. I wouldn't say the 8 to 10 hours, they were like strict, like we're studying this. We took breaks, we played games, like a lot of iMessage games or on the phone. So, but it was most of the day was spent GMAT or like mental health study breaks. So having someone to go through it with, that was a big factor. And then the second part, I kind of just fell in love with the exam. Like it's such a beautiful exam. The way they test questions, quant, verbal, like both of those, the way they phrase it, and how they test certain factors of like logic, thinking. It's not just like, what do you know? Can you regurgitate this formula? So I really wanted to like take that apart and find out how they made like such a cool test.
Awesome. And what else were you doing during that couple months? Did you have an internship, or were you working at all, or was it just, were you able to just focus all of your time on studying and exercise and that was it?
That was my most, I don't know, like strict priority. I did have an internship. It was part-time. It was like 10, 20 hours a week. So not that much. And like you said, working out. But really everything else came second.
Awesome. There's a couple of people asking questions about your mock exams here now. So which exam, how many practice tests did you do? Which ones did you do? And kind of related question, did they ever demotivate you? Is there anything that came out as a surprise after that first one where you got the 650?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about kind of how you spaced out those exams, when you took them, which ones you took, and kind of how you reacted to them.
But yeah, one thing I did forget to mention, sorry if this was misleading, but I did purchase the 4 additional tests. So I'm sorry about that. I forgot to mention that. I meant no like prep course or anything like that. But I did buy those 4 tests through GMAT Club. I think they're like $42. But yeah, I had some really demotivating portions in there. So I think I studied for a little bit. I got a 730 and I was like, okay, wow, that's good. Like, let me push more, see what I can do. And what did I do? I studied I studied quant a lot because my quant was like 46 on that one. And that's still like a pretty low percentile coming from someone with an engineering background, like always been good at quant in my life. So I was like, okay, let me really drill quant for like 1 or 2 weeks, get that up to at least a 49.50. And I took it again. I got a worse quant score and a better verbal score without studying more verbal. Like obviously there's fluctuation in your GMAT tests, but studying quant for like a week straight, just drilling that, and then getting a worse quant score, so demoralizing. So, yeah, it was, I think there's just something to be said about habits and like not only looking at the results, like really if you put in the work, like you will get the results. So just don't look at like the immediate results like I did.
So, okay, so if I heard you right, so there was that initial so your practice test, there's a 650. These are all the official MBA.com tests. So it's something like a 43 quant. And then studied for a bit, got your 730, verbal shot through the roof right away, 46 quant, which felt disappointing, certainly as an engineer. And then the third test you took, the quant went down even more, or went down from that 46,
Yeah.
and you were 44, 45, something like that. So as you kind of did that next phase of, oh wow, these quant scores don't make any sense given my skills are. Tell us how you pulled yourself out of it. What is it that clicked for you? What is it you started to do differently? What is it that you identified as the real underlying problem when you know plenty of math? I mean, the test is built on a foundation of 9th and 10th grade math, which you've almost certainly mastered for the most part. Again, barring an odd thing here or there about prime factorization, the content you've achieved awfully close to mastery. So how is it that after kind of really 3 disappointing practice test scores, how did you see out of it, I guess? What is it that clicked?
I left it alone for a little while. I was kind of down about the quant score. I looked back at that GMAT verbal grid or the GMAT scoring grid. I saw like how important verbal was. I was like, okay, well, even with this quant score, like if I get a perfect or near perfect verbal score, it doesn't really matter. I can just focus on verbal. So that's what I did. Focused on verbal a ton. And the flip thing happened actually. My verbal score stayed the same and my quant went up a ton. I was like, I haven't touched quant in 2 weeks. I thought it'd be terrible. But I think taking a step back from it, maybe quant something that you don't want to be like too into, because I would approach quant the section like it was kind of a game. It was fun, and it was low pressure, way lower than verbal. Because verbal, I was like, I gotta get every question right. Quant, I was like, I can get like 7 wrong and still do really good on the test. So I had fun with quant. They're like little riddles, little logic games. So I took a step back from it once I had the underlying fundamentals. Took a step back, did some verbal, came back to it with just the attitude of like, this is fun. I want to try this. So I don't know if that's very helpful, but that is what worked for me.
So it's really the attitude shift where you started to kind of say, instead of gripping too hard and trying to, I got to crank out every question perfect. I'm an engineer. I got to do well on this. Just kind of relaxed and said, hey, these can be fun. These are puzzles. And that was really the only change, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Cool. You're making me think of something that we run into a lot tutoring. We sometimes call it engineer's disease, which is often people with a lot of formal math training, whether it's engineering or economics or pure math or whatever. you learn a lot of formulas. You learn a lot of very structured ways to approach things. You know too much math. This math is so far behind you as far as the level of it, the fundamental content. And really what the GMAT's going after is, can you look at this thing from different angles and be flexible?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what it's about, right? It's about the quantitative. It's not called the math section. It's called the quantitative reasoning section. The formulas only do so much for you. You better know how to find the area of a circle, but you don't need to know really anything that you learned in an undergraduate engineering program. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So hearing you say that, I think it's a very difficult thing for anybody watching for me to say with a straight face, hey, do what Colton just did, relax and it'll be fine. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily repeatable. But I think there's a nugget of, I think, a really fundamental truth about the exam there, which is once you recognize that it's not about how much math you know or how many steps you've memorized or how many Buñuel's explanations you've memorized, and it's learning the right mindset to approach the quant as a puzzle once your foundations are strong enough. That's really the holy grail. It's a very difficult thing to do if you're struggling with quant, but your foundations are strong. It's hard to lock into that, but it makes sense that for you, it was just kind of a mindset shift. Hard to repeat for other people, but kind of hearing you talk about your verbal experience as well, it makes sense to me that kind of the way your mind works, you were able to kind of go, oh, wait, this is what the game is. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And if I could add one fact I found out throughout my study, it was a study of a bunch of standardized tests, ACT, MCAT, and including the GMAT. And what they found was that as questions increase in difficulty, the average time spent per question increased linearly with like a positive trend for every standardized exam except the GMAT. I think it might have been Charles that said that, but that really says a lot about the GMAT and like what makes a question hard. It's not how much you know. It's not if you can get a formula and like solve for variables quickly. It's like the hard questions are the ones that people don't see the certain angle like with which to look at it. So it's a big thing is like coming to terms with it's not an engineering problem that I have to like dive deep in and just dig my head down and go for it. It's a question that you kind of have to sauce around. It's the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's looking for the best entry point, not necessarily attacking it directly the way you might an engineering problem.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is really difficult when you use non-official GMAT quant problems is sometimes people who are writing these in test prep companies conflate complexity with difficulty. So the more steps and the more words we put in there, the more difficult the question is, because that's how almost every other exam, whether it's a standardized exam or something you take in university or whatever, that's how almost all exams work. And on the GMAT, one of the things that I really, really appreciate about the test construction is long and hard are not really correlated. It's elegant, short. If you see the way into it, you can answer that really, really hard question quickly, potentially, if you can see the way in. And that's the really, really hard thing for people who have really good quant skills, who are at a 43 or 46, know a lot about mathematics. That's the thing that is the hurdle for people who are struggling typically in that situation. And it's interesting that you kind of intuited your way through it and went, wait, I'm doing this wrong, mindset shift, and then you were fine. Okay, one question that got asked a little while ago. So what business schools are you planning to apply to? Tell us a little bit about what you have in mind for that.
I had no plans to apply to business school anytime soon anyway. So my goal moving forward is to apply to MBB firms, that being like McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting Group, for management consulting. And so I took the GMAT because that's something they look at as standardized test scores. And I thought if I did really well on that, that would help me land at least a first shot internship, because these companies are super hard to land internships, like unless you know someone. Another big factor is coming from Alabama, we don't have a lot of alums in the finance and consulting industry. So I knew I had to do something to make myself stand out, not having those connections. So I thought the GMAT would be really helpful for that. But I do plan to apply to business school. That's one of the reasons I do want to go to these firms, is so I can further elevate my career with going to business schools. So to answer the question, looking, I don't know exactly, but like just the top ones: Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, any of those.
Awesome. And for anybody, somebody finally pitched in with a roll tide. I was waiting for that. So for anybody watching who is still an undergrad working on the GMAT, just be aware, deferred admissions programs, wonderful, wonderful things in a situation like this. So as a senior, you can apply. The final deadlines are typically in March or April. Colton, I think you'd be a great candidate for it. You've got great stats. So something to think about. We can talk about it a little bit once we finish the live broadcast. Fascinating. The thing you've inspired here, Colton, there's about 20 messages. People watching are trying to form study groups right now, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So BB, Abhijit, the GMAT Club admins watching here. I don't know if there's a way for us to facilitate this at all through the website or through the chat room or anything like that. But I love the idea of this, kind of having some of that happens, I think, organically on the GMAT Club chat function. But if there's a way we can help facilitate people kind of matchmaking, kind of having these, study buddies and getting to have that live feedback with each other. Honestly, been a GMAT tutor for 20 years. I would love to sit here and tell you that there's some magic that a tutor has. And the truth is, I think what the best tutors are doing is they're getting you to think. So what you just did with your friend, Colton, is exactly what a tutor would do, which is try to get you to think more deeply about everything and think about it in the right ways. And it's not so much telling you the magical things to do. It's getting you to dive deeper, getting you to think more deeply, getting you to think in the right ways, getting you to fix little bits of your process. And you guys kind of did that for each other organically. And that's something that if you're looking for free ways to prep, that's the way to do it. Is the more feedback you can get from somebody else, that's exactly the same process that you'll go through, with a good tutor. It's learning how to think better for yourself. There's no magic that anybody's going to teach you.
Good. I'm happy to have started that. And that's why they call it a tutor, not a teacher, because a teacher is someone who throws information at you. Tutor makes you think, helps you through the thought process behind what you're doing. So it's definitely a difference.
Awesome. Okay, I think we got to the bulk of kind of the questions that I think are the most relevant. Right now, the chat is just going crazy pants on people hooking up with study buddies, which I think is absolutely amazing. There is now looks like there's a section of the forum dedicated to study buddy signup. So fantastic. Colton, you've inspired a whole bunch of people here. This is amazing. We do have we've got a Bama graduate who's studying for GMAT for grad school right now.
Let's go.
So you've got fans from India, Alabama. I saw somebody from, I believe, Hungary up in there. Any final words, any final bits of advice for people?
Just in your approach to the GMAT, always dig one level deeper, think critically. When you get a question right, whether you get a question wrong, always find the underlying reason and really explore the test.
Love it. Colton, thank you so much for doing this. This was a blast. One quick order of business. So we're about to launch a full study plan on the GMAT Club website in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes out for that. We'll do a little promo video here on the GMAT Club channel. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. And there's links in the chat right now. There'll be links in the description of the video to Colton's debrief on the forum. So if you have more questions for him, fire away. He's got that natural teaching instinct. So he's going to write some good responses if you post something publicly on the forum. Hope I didn't just burn a whole lot of your time, Colton. And again, looks like we've got a study buddy feature that is just getting started on GMAT Club. So if you want somebody to kick ideas back and forth with, go through the process that Colton did with his friends, by all means, click on that link, get in the forum, find a friend, start talking. It's really good for you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Colton, congratulations on the absolutely amazing score. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.